Yeah, I don't think Mother knew about this.
Uncle Marvin was strangled by his own beard.
Yeah, you never saw it coming. And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. And our guest this week, a couple of really good ones. We've got an ordinary person with an extraordinary find. It covers World War I, a pandemic, a swapping of letters between families, century-old letters. It's an amazing thing. JoAnne Jessee is going to join us here in about 10 minutes. Later in the show, Melanie McComb from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org is going to give us the gist of one of her very popular lectures these days. It's called Show Me the Money, and she's going to talk about various financial records that can help you trace your ancestors. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, you know what to do. It's on our Facebook page. You can link to it through our website as well, extremegenes.com. It's free. You get a blog from me, a couple of links to current and past shows, and links to stories you'll find interesting as a genealogist. Right now, off to Boston, where David Allen Lambert is standing by, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. David, greetings. How you doing, bud?
I am doing fine. You know, we talk about serendipity and genealogy all the time.
Yeah.
Well, that happened to us this past weekend. My wife's sister, who lives up in Maine, just happened to be looking online at their grandmother's house and then actually found out it was for sale last week for the first time in 30 years since her grandmother sold it. So
Wow.
My wife's grandmother's house, they owned for 30 years. We went down for the open house, only to find out that the house sold that morning, being on the market for one day, for about 3 times what the family sold it for.
Right.
I got on the horn because my wife looked a little sad, and I said, let's call the real estate agent. I called her up and explained that my wife's family lived there. Her mother had passed, grew up there, and my wife lived there as a young girl. She said, why don't you come down in a couple hours? I'll give you a tour. We went in. She took pictures. We went through the house. I videotaped it. But the fun part is my wife and I recreated a photograph of ourselves in the family living room, which was the first photograph that we ever took together 34 years ago.
Wow. What a great story, David. That is so awesome. And, it really goes to show that this is true. And I found a lot of photos online of family-related homes where you can take an online virtual tour of the house. But if you can find when it's for sale and you can actually get a tour of it, what a great opportunity. How awesome is that?
It really is. And I'll tell you, I almost wish that there could be a website that we could go to and say, all right, this is my ancestor's address. Send me a notification when it goes up for sale. Wouldn't that be a fun place to be?
Yes. Great idea.
Well, it's February, so it's Black History Month, and American Ancestors, we honor African-American genealogy by the works of many of our scholars, including Megan Siekman, who is one of our lead researchers. And we have a page on American Ancestors where people can go to on our education learning resources on African-American genealogy that has resources, video that's almost an hour long, different guides that we have online, and links to things that we have from NEHGS to help you with your African-American genealogy to honor Black History Month.
That is awesome.
In New South Wales, there is now a pop-up DNA center. I thought to myself, what are they doing? Just collecting DNA, it's a commercial company? No, it's law enforcement. And people that have lost family members that are missing, that never found out what happened to them, are giving donations of DNA to help with the identification of over 300 unidentified bones and bodies that were found in New South Wales and Australia since 1964. What an amazing process. Every state in the United States should be doing that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Imagine having that on your mind all the time. What happened to my family member? And not being able to do anything about it. At least it gives them something where they feel maybe they're contributing to the search so the question can ultimately be answered.
I've got some exciting news from FamilySearch. We're always finding some great things on FamilySearch.org, but now you can have even more chance of that with 100 million relatives added to FamilySearch's family tree last year. In total, there are over 1.3 billion searchable people in these records that you can find on FamilySearch. It's amazing.
Wow, that is incredible. 100 million, but it really goes to illustrate how much work was being done throughout the pandemic year. So many people at home, nothing much to do. They get into that, and it's fulfilling.
And besides that, there are over 8.3 billion names searchable in historical records on FamilySearch.
Yeah,
now.
And it's free.
That's a good price. Well, I love DNA, and I like to take our family history, our news around the globe. And this time I'm going to Crete. In this ancient Greek island, there is an amazing discovery that was made in 2009. It was a skeleton of a lady about 40 to 50 years old who died between about 900 BC and 650 BC. Now, it could just be a typical skeleton, except for the wear on her bones. And you know what's interesting is because the cartilage on her knee and hip joints had been worn, and that it looks like the muscles on the right side of her body had been noticeably developed based on the bones wear, we can now tell that she was the person who made ceramic vessels. The theory is that she was flexing her leg to turn the kick wheel that would have turned the pot around that she was making, so that wore out her joints. And then, of course, she'd be repeatedly leaning to one side, spinning the clay to shape it and sculpt it, and that developed the muscles on the other side of her body. So
wow.
No DNA, no census to tell you what the occupation is, no obituary. It's all in the bones.
All in the bones. And what period of time are we talking about here?
This is between 950 BC and 650 BC in that point in Crete's history.
Wow. That's an incredible analysis.
Well, that's all I have from Beantown this week. I just want to say that if you're not a member of American Ancestors, the New England Historic Genealogical Society in Boston would like to welcome you, and you can even have a little extra bonus from Extreme Genes. Go online to AmericanAncestors.org and use the coupon code EXTREME and save $20 on your membership.
All right, David, thank you so much. And, of course, at the back end of the show, you're back as we answer another question on Ask Us Anything. Talk to you then.
Talk soon.
All right. And coming up next, it's a woman named JoAnne Jessee, an ordinary person with an extraordinary find. You're going to enjoy this story. Coming up next on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show in 3 minutes. Hey, it's Fisher, and here it comes, Roots Tech Connect. We've been hearing about it for a long time. It's going to be February 25th, 6th, and 7th, and Ancestry.com is going to be a big part of it. Krista Cowan from Ancestry is on the line with me right now. And Krista, what do you guys have in store for us at Roots Tech Connect?
Well, we are releasing a brand new series of videos for Roots Tech. It's called Genealogy in a Minute. They are quick tutorials just to guide you along to your next discovery when you only have a minute to spare.
Wow. Give us some examples of some of the things you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so we recognize that some people are brand new to family history, and we want to make it as easy as possible for them to dive right in. So we have some very simple things like how to start a tree on Ancestry or what that little shaky leaf means. But then people who are more veteran family historians and maybe just are short on time, we wanted to provide them with some content too.
All right, just look for the Ancestry booth online with Roots Tech Connect at rootstech.org.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
Anytime is a great time to learn more about your family. Did you miss Roots Tech Connect this year? It's not too late to experience Roots Tech classes, keynotes, and how-to content. Just visit rootstech.org to see what you missed and to experience Roots Tech Connect on your own timetable. Select inspiring and insightful messages that will help you in your pursuit to connect with and share your family story in new ways. You can then use the free resources found at FamilySearch.org or the FamilySearch Family Tree app to have a deeper personal experience getting to know your family, past and present. Connecting with family and learning about your ancestors provides healing, peace, and a sense of belonging. And it's easy to share what you learn with others to help and inspire them as well. Visit rootstech.org for some inspiration or visit FamilySearch.org to continue on your journey of family discovery today. All right, back at it on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And the pandemic has caused a lot of people to think back to the one 100 years ago because they're still within memory. There's still a lot of records, photographs, of course, dominant from that time period. And my next guest got into it and made a haul of a discovery. She's JoAnne Jessee. She's from Waukesha, Wisconsin. And JoAnne, welcome to Extreme Genes. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So how did all this start? Your head has obviously gone back 100 years or so.
Yes, my maternal grandma, Jean, she had two aunts that she lost that I knew of during the 1918 flu pandemic. And so after being in lockdown for several weeks myself, I decided to start looking into this. My mom and my aunt have been the caretakers of a hoarder and genealogist's dream of pictures and letters and scrapbooks on that side. And it's been just something that I was able to dig into. So I had copies of everything that my mom had scanned over the period of several years. And I decided, let's figure out who did we really lose? And was it more than just the two sisters? And that's kind of where this all began.
Sure, and where the circumstances were around that. The stories of the siblings are a part of the stories of your directs as well, I think, because of all the interaction and the relationships. So what happened?
Right.
I see, as you've prepared me for some of this, there was really kind of a step-by-step as this progressed, and it was fascinating.
Yes. So on May 3rd, I documented who I thought was everybody who had passed away as a result of the Spanish flu. And that included my great-grandmother's daughter, her father-in-law, her two sisters, and her brother.
Oh. Wow.
I later discovered that there was also a half-nephew who was part of this loss as well. So that was obviously more than I realized of family members who had been lost during the pandemic. And who knows, there could even be more that I didn't realize about. But there was one in particular, Anne. I found out that we had her whole scrapbook and letters that her husband had sent her from France during World War I to her.
Wow. So this all ties back to the war as well.
Yes. So Anne met a man named Stuart, and in 1916, they started dating. And he registered for the draft in June of 1917. And got drafted pretty much right away. By August, his name had been drawn. And so they ended up getting married August 15th, 1917, before he went pretty much right away to Fort Sheridan in Illinois for the 2nd Reserve Officers Training Camp. And by January 13th of 1918, he was on his way to Liverpool, where he would then join up with the AEF in France. So they didn't have a lot of time together from when they got married to when he was deployed.
Right. No children. No children,
right. You can tell from some of the letters that I've seen that they definitely wanted children. So yeah, they were separated pretty much right away, and they wrote many, many letters to each other. We know this because they numbered their letters. You're into the 200s. Sometimes there'd be multiple letters going in a day. Stuart went to France in January of 1918, and then in October is when they had their 2-year dating anniversary.
Okay.
And it just so happens that the day before that is when we discovered through this whole adventure that she had contracted the flu the day before that. And things kind of progressed quickly from there.
So as a result of all this, then, you knew that you had certain information that you could develop from there, but you went even further than that, because I know that the survivor, this Stuart, he went out and got married again after she passed away, right?
Right. So I decided on May 13th to see, does Stuart have any descendants? So I went on Ancestry and found someone who had his name in her tree. So I sent her a message saying, I'm related to his first wife who died in the pandemic. And we have copies of the letters that he sent to Anne while he was in France. And I was wondering if you knew anyone else in the family, and on a real long shot, if anybody knew if her letters to him had been kept. So within 5 days, I had heard back from the second cousin of Stuart's granddaughter. And she said, oh my goodness, we know Stuart very well because he and his second wife only had one daughter. We spent holidays with him and his grandchildren growing up. And I'm going to work on connecting you with 4 grandchildren.
That's a good start.
Yeah. I was amazed to hear back so quickly in the first place. And then it just kept going faster and faster from there. One of Stuart's granddaughters, who I've been in contact with the most, she had a copy of his memoir that was transcribed by the local library back in 1975.
Oh,
and
wow.
It turns out when everything started in March with the shutdowns and everything, they all remembered Stuart's first wife had died of the Spanish flu in 1918. So she was just reading the little bit in his memoir that discussed that. I think she also had some photos of the couple. They loved their grandmother so much, they never really gave much thought to his first wife, kind of out of reverence and respect for their grandmother. But at the same time, they had kept all these things. So she reached out to her brother, and it turns out that he did have the letters from Anne to Stuart in France during World War I.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that was on May 24th. We discovered that.
What a haul. So
right.
Did he scan them? Did he give them to you? How did that work?
He scanned them so that we could take a look, and he did that really quite quickly, I would say. It turns out he also had a couple of the telegrams that arrived way after she died, actually, trying to let him know that she was sick and that she had eventually passed away. He notes later in his memoir and other places that the lines with the cables were just jammed and messages were not getting through at that time. But in addition to the letters, they actually had a detailed letter from one of their friends who was actually the doctor who took care of her and her sister. Those 2 sisters died 1 day apart. Oh. And he gave a very detailed account of how they were doing leading up to their passing. It's just astonishing. Fevers over 105.
Oh my
Things
gosh,
like that.
Awful.
So,
well, you know, when you consider that he survived long enough to write his memoir and include all this information in there, and then you have the letters he wrote, and then they have the letters that she wrote, you're able to put this entire century-old story together the way you have. And for a lot of people who pass away without having any descendants, any children, they're just kind of forgotten as that aunt back there or that sibling that died young or something like that. But they're real people now with all the information that you have.
Yes, and it's been really interesting to see. I mean, Rockford, Illinois, where they all grew up, is not very small. I think the population is well over 100,000. But my maternal grandma, Jean, she was connected to the family of Stuart's second wife throughout her life. In fact, I think we have a wedding invitation to Stuart's daughter's wedding from the 1950s.
Okay.
And my mom and her siblings were classmates with a lot of his nieces and nephews. I don't think they knew his grandchildren per se, but they knew the other people in the family. And they also were in some of the same friend circles. For example, there was a famous architect in Rockford named Jesse Barloga that they were all friends with. So it's just kind of interesting how they watched each other throughout their lives. I mean, part of the record that my family kept was a newspaper clipping from 1970 showing Stuart. He was a painter, and, they thought enough to save this article where it mentions how he didn't find out about his wife's death until weeks later.
So he was still family then?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they directly spent time together, but they kept track of each other.
Sure, right, of course. He had been part of the family at one time many years earlier. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. What a great find. How did it make you feel when you discovered all this information, and what are you going to do with it?
Well, when I especially figured out that Stuart was still writing letters to Anne after she had passed away, she died on October 19th, and he was still mailing letters on November 3rd. Obviously, there's a delay in the mail, but I think he was involved in the telegraph office even. But the fact that he hadn't received any information over the cables was kind of shocking. So that just made me feel so heartsick that he had gotten word that she was sick, but he had had no updates after that.
And this is just like a week before the end of World War I.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even thought about
November
that.
November 11th.
Because I was,
yes.
Yeah. That makes it even more surprising. I hadn't layered in that history with this. But basically, the next step is I've talked with my family members, and Elizabetta has talked with her family members, and we decided that since they don't have any children together, that we are going to swap our sets of letters, which seems a little bit strange that Anne, who wrote the letters, will have her letters back, and they'll have Stuart's letters back with their family. But at the same time, there's little tidbits and morsels in there about their friends and family at home, or from his end, what it was like in France. He was going on about fleas and things. They had a flea problem for a while. He himself actually had a slight attack of Spanish influenza around the same time that she did. So we thought that that would be the way that we decide to preserve this family history. Yeah.
Are you writing up the story?
Well, I feel like I'm well on my way I was putting a timeline together last night. We've got letters, we've got newspaper articles. The information is there. It's just a matter of how it will come together and when.
Great stuff, JoAnne. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
What a great story. And coming up next, Melanie McComb on her recent lecture, Show Me the Money, talking about your ancestors' financial records in 5 minutes. It's always fun to have my good friend, the genealogist from NEHGS, the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and AmericanAncestors.org on the line. I'm talking about Melanie McComb. Hi, Mel. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. How are you?
Great. It is great to have you back. You've been doing a lecture lately that has been very intriguing to me, and I thought a lot of people might want to hear about. And it's called Follow the Money. Sounds like a good baseball movie to me, but I know that there is a family history tie to this, talking about the research. Fill us in on what this is all about.
Sure. So, similar to what we see in police procedurals, sometimes when you just can't find someone, you need to turn to a different type of paper trail. And a lot of times our ancestors are going to leave more financial records that are going to be left in their place where you're not finding those vital records, you're not finding them in the census. And that's really a great way, especially when you're tracking someone through a particular state or within the country itself or even overseas.
Wow. You're talking about a lot of transactions here potentially. What kind of records are we talking about?
Sure. So we're talking about items like land deeds, probate, taxes, pension records, especially if you have anybody that's Civil War and earlier, and even employment records for the more contemporary ancestors.
Well, and there were pension records for railroad workers, for example, right?
That's right. And those files are huge that you can get access to from the National Archives. And they give you a number of details involved that talk about the surviving spouse and their children. So anybody that would really have any kind of claim to the pension would be noted.
Wow, that's a long list of people. So let's kind of go through these groups just a little at a time. We're obviously very familiar with pension records for Civil War soldiers and Revolutionary soldiers. What about for more recent generations of warriors?
So for more recent generations, there are some records. They're not officially pension records, but there are payment vouchers that were issued. So a lot of times when you're researching someone that served, let's say, in like World War I, World War II, or even as recently as Korea and Vietnam, there are still payment files that are included in their personnel records. And in some cases, that might be all that's left. And when the fire occurred in 1973 in St. Louis, Missouri, a lot of the Army and Air Force records were destroyed. And one of the few surviving things you might find is the payment voucher. And that notes this is the final payment that was being made to the veteran or their family and has their address on it.
So would that also include potentially what unit they served in when they were participating in a war?
It doesn't always go down to the unit, but they do reference the service number, which is key. Because if you have the service number, you can go into records like the Veteran Affairs Burrell's death file and other items to find out more information about the enlistment. Then you can contact the VA to get a copy of the discharge paperwork to find out more about the actual unit itself they served in.
And we should just make clear to people that if you had a Navy man back there, those records were not included in those that were burned.
That's correct, and also Marines as well. Those also are intact.
So are there any bank records out there that our people left behind?
There are several different ones, and they actually are very useful for when you're trying to trace somebody that immigrated to the United States. So, for example, in New York, there is the Immigrant Savings Bank,
right,
and that was very popular for a lot of Irish immigrants that came through. And when the accounts were opened, the account books that we see online actually note the name of the ship they came in on, and sometimes even the county in Ireland they were from.
That's pretty valuable stuff. Does it actually show some of the transactions they made in this bank?
It does. It usually shows like when someone set up the account and who was the main account holder. And then there are other records you can go into if you wanted to see if there were any changes to the account, like if they changed who the main person was.
Interesting. All right. What else do you have?
So how about land deeds? Land deeds are my favorite to go through.
Oh, yes. There's always family in those.
There's always family in those. And that's something I think that a lot of people don't really understand is that anytime there's especially an estate file that's being settled, there usually is what we call a quitclaim deed that's occurring, in which the heirs of the estate, which usually are all family members, direct family members, the children especially, and surviving spouse, they might give up their right to the property because maybe they don't want to move from where they are, or they just don't want to run, like the family farm or other property. So when that occurs, that is a really great kind of document to look at because it clearly tells you that here are the heirs of so-and-so and names all of the children, including the daughters and their husbands if they're married and what their names are and where they're located.
And that's such a huge thing for tracing female ancestors, isn't it?
Absolutely, because you're right. Sometimes when you don't find that ancestor, you're hoping to find that marriage record. And if the marriage record doesn't turn up, that's really a good way to tie everybody together. Similar to looking at things like newspapers. A lot of these financial transactions are going to end up in the newspapers when somebody's trying to collect a debt or they're trying to settle the estate at the end and they're calling everybody into the attorney's office to have a reading of the will.
I know that in doing New York research periodically, there's actually books that they made of all the real estate transactions by year. And it talks about who bought the property, who sold the property, the legal description of the property, and often the address at which the property sits. And so there's just so much stuff to be found there. And I would imagine there are similar items elsewhere in the country.
Absolutely. And even outside the country, too, you'll typically find those deed abstract indexes are what you really want to look into. We always recommend when using the index because you're right. That's going to give you that summary level detail. And depending on where the property is, like let's say if you're looking at something in a more rural area in the Midwest or something, you need a little bit more information to make sure you're finding the property. But if you can find the lot number and the quadrant and everything that they're supposed to be in reference somewhere else, you could then, contact the Register of Deeds to get a copy of those indexes, and you can see the life cycle of that property year over year.
Wow, and that can reveal more family from earlier generations or neighbors or how the property was subdivided by family as they shared it among the kids.
That's right. And that's how a lot of people, especially in the Midwest, can go back to like that homesteading, going back to when they first acquired the public property before it went into private hands.
So what else is there out there that we might get our hands on as we follow the money, Melanie?
Well, of course, there is also employment records. So, like while you mentioned the railroad, which is also a big source of employment, there are also other sources of employment when you think about people that are working on the Works Progress Administration projects in the 30s. You could find people working on projects like the Panama Canal, and that can show you where someone was, what their job was on site, where their residence was, what they're getting paid. So that can be your gold mine of information when you just kind of see someone, they just kind of drop off and you kind of think like, well, did they, take a train going out somewhere and just find work? And sometimes that might be the place where you find them.
Well, and consider the stories that can come out of that. I mean, really, I think the richest vein of family history for anybody isn't just the names and the dates and the places. It's those stories. And this sounds like a rich source.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And when I was tracing like my maternal great-grandfather, Anton Galunas, one of the things that I have uncovered is that he likely was a merchant seaman working possibly with the British Navy or maybe even the volunteer Russian Navy. And at one point I was trying to trace what happened to him and how he ended up in the United States. And I had this fantastic story that my grandmother would tell me that he somehow ended up in South America and was around this particular tribe and everything. And I thought it was too incredible to prove, but then I found a listing for the ship that he was on. Apparently it actually got into a bit of an accident down there right by the river where my grandmother mentioned it, the Tonkantine River. So there's a little bit of a nugget of truth found when you look for some of these documents. And that was because it was noting the damage that was taking place on a merchant vessel.
Wow. Unbelievable. She's Melanie McComb. She does a lecture called Follow the Money, and you got a little taste of what that's all about. Mel, thanks for coming on. Always good to talk to you. We'll catch you again soon.
You too as well. Take care.
We're going to find out about the newest upcoming episode of Finding Your Roots on PBS when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hey, it's Fisher, and here it comes, Roots Tech Connect. We've been hearing about it for a long time. It's going to be February 25th, 6th, and 7th, and Ancestry.com is going to be a big part of it. Krista Cowan from Ancestry is on the line with me right now. And Krista, what do you guys have in store for us at Roots Tech Connect?
Well, we are releasing a brand new series of videos for Roots Tech. It's called Genealogy in a Minute. They are quick tutorials just to guide you along to your next discovery when you only have a minute to spare.
Wow. Give us some examples of some of the things you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so we recognize that some people are brand new to family history, and we want to make it as easy as possible for them to dive right in. So we have some very simple things like how to start a tree on Ancestry or what that little shaky leaf means. But then people who are more veteran family historians and maybe just are short on time, we wanted to provide them with some content too.
All right, just look for the Ancestry booth online with Roots Tech Connect at rootstech.org.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G., Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries. holidays.
Anytime is a great time to learn more about your family. Did you miss Roots Tech Connect this year? It's not too late to experience Roots Tech classes, keynotes, and how-to content. Just visit rootstech.org to see what you missed and to experience Roots Tech Connect on your own timetable. Select inspiring and insightful messages that will help you in your pursuit to connect with and share your family story in new ways. You can then use the free resources found at FamilySearch.org or the FamilySearch Family Tree app to have a deeper personal experience getting to know your family, past and present. Connecting with family and learning about your ancestors provides healing, peace, and a sense of belonging. And it's easy to share what you learn with others to help and inspire them as well. Visit rootstech.org for some inspiration or visit FamilySearch.org to continue on your journey of family discovery today. All right, back at it on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show on ExtremeGenes.com. And in for the very busy Dr. Henry Louis Gates this week. It's the showrunner, senior producer, director for Finding Your Roots on PBS. It's Sabin Streeter. Sabin, great to have you on the show. How you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me, Scott. I'm thrilled to be here. I love your show, and I'm sorry Skip can't be here. He'll be back very soon, but I'm going to try to fill his very large shoes for you.
Well, you have a very large show. We watch it all the time and really enjoy it. What do you have coming up for us this week?
This week, we have musician Pharrell Williams and filmmaker Kasi Lemmons. Kasi Lemmons directed the recent Oscar-nominated Harriet Tubman biopic, and Pharrell is, of course, Pharrell.
Well, yeah, the song Happy, I mean, I think we all kind of dance down the street to it, and things are going
Happy
well.
Happy is one of the biggest hits ever and is very, very expressive of who Pharrell is. He is a happy guy.
Well, I can't imagine he'd be too happy this week when he learned some of the things that you guys discovered.
Yes, the two guests are united by the fact that for both of them, we found original documents in which their relatives who were enslaved actually talk about their experience under slavery.
Wow.
In the case of Pharrell, his third great aunt, a woman named Jane Arrington, was interviewed as part of the Slave Narrative Project, which you may know was this oral history that was done by the federal government in the 1930s. They went around and they interviewed still surviving formerly enslaved people. There were about 2,300 of them they interviewed. And what are the odds of this? One of them is Pharrell's third great aunt, this older sister of Pharrell's second great grandfather.
Wow.
And she describes in great detail, she gives one of the longer of the slave narratives that exist, in great detail over multiple pages, what her family experienced under slavery. And it was a roller coaster for Pharrell because she talks about how his second great grandfather was enslaved as a child, as a 10-year-old. Well, Pharrell's got an 11-year-old of his own, and that just really hurt, understandably. Sure. And then she talks about how the slaves were beaten by some of their masters, and some beaten to death, not Pharrell's relatives, but Pharrell's ancestors are on this plantation where slaves are being beaten to death.
Right.
Pharrell got so upset. We had something we never had before. We just stopped the interview. Dr. Gates felt it was just too much. And so we stopped. We said, we'll be back. And we came back a couple of months later and we resumed. And the second half was probably just as hard as the first. He basically said the whole interview sort of set his soul ablaze, were his words. And he was really moved. And it's one of the most powerful interviews we've ever done.
Do you think it was kind of like a survivor's guilt for him?
To some degree, yes. And I think to some degree there was just rage. And I think it was hard for him to feel so much anger at what his ancestors went through. So Kasi Lemmons, we found one of her ancestors was enslaved in Alabama and was interviewed by an Alabama newspaper in 1879. Reconstruction had collapsed, and the white supremacists who were in charge of Alabama were going around sort of writing newspaper articles about how slavery hadn't been so bad. It was all a total myth. But if you were a black farmer in 1870s Alabama and you were doing okay, you had to interact with the white people around you, and you had to toe the line of their discourse. So Casey's ancestor, this guy Primus Lemmons, gets interviewed by this newspaper, and he talks about like how great his master was and how slavery wasn't so bad. And the story that comes out is that he was forced by his master to accompany his master's son in the Confederate armies. He's enslaved by this guy, and he's captured in Vicksburg. And at that time, he could have just gone to the Union Army and been free. But he stays with his master and actually goes back to Alabama because he has family there.
Sure.
And after the war, his former master rewards him with some property, and he's a genius farmer. He becomes actually one of the more successful farmers in the area. and he gets profiled, and he tells his life story. It's an amazing story. And he also says at the end of it, he kept the name Lemons because his father was an African named Jim Lemons, and he wanted one day, he hoped, to be able to connect to his people back in Africa.
It sounds like a great show coming up this week. And, of course, I would encourage everybody to check their local listings for times and what channel it would be on there. But, Sabin, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I really appreciate it.
David Allen Lambert is coming up next with another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, we're back for the final segment of our show for this week. It is Ask Us Anything. It is Fisher here along with David Allen Lambert, back from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. And Dave, we've got an email here from Lonnie in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And Lonnie writes, Fish and David, have you ever had your ancestors' handwriting analyzed to help you with your research? If so, how have you done it? Lonnie in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Dave?
Well, I've kind of done it firsthand by myself. So, give you an example. My ancestor died in 1807. He's actually Captain Jonathan Poor. He was of the Essex Militia, marched on to Lexington and conquered. I always suspected that the muster roll that he appeared on when he marched on Lexington and conquered with his company was probably written in his hand. And what I did, Fish, is I did a scan from his signature and his will, and then I did a scan from that, and I overlaid them on the computer screen, and it matched up with the signature probably about 90%, and even the curvature of the letters. There was some change, but not much.
Wow, that's a great discovery. So you figured out that your ancestor actually wrote out this information during the Revolution.
Mm-hmm, when they traveled for 86 miles round trip to go off to Lexington and Concord, yeah.
Unbelievable. That's great. I've actually had a handwriting analyst on the show. Her name was Nancy Douglas. It was about 5 years ago. And I can tell you right now, Lonnie, episode 125. And I actually supplied this person with samples of the handwriting of my ancestors because I wanted to know about their personalities, if she was able to do that. And she had worked with court records in analyzing the handwriting of suspects, that kind of thing. But she was able to look at my ancestors' writing, and she said that she basically divides up the handwriting into three zones. There's the upper zone, which would be, for example, with an L or a T. There were the lower zone letters like a G or a Y, and then there were the middle zone letters, the I, the M, the N, those types of letters. And each of those zones would represent something that's going on in your head. So ideas, creativity, imagination, philosophies, that was all in the upper zone. And then the middle zone letters, she said, would reflect the here and now, the day-to-day, if you're being stressed out by something. The lower zone letters represent physical stuff like desires about getting money or physical drive, sexuality, your desire for change, your level of restlessness, all those things. So she was actually able to go through and look at some of the handwriting of these various ancestors and tell me about what was going on in their lives at the time, things about their personality, what motivated them in their lives. I mean, it was really fascinating. So I'd recommend you go back and listen to episode 125 with Nancy Douglas from 2016. So it's really great stuff.
You need to get her on the show, and I'm going to send you my signature. I want to see what she says about me.
Well, I got to see if I can find her again. It's been a while, but you know,
we're genealogists.
That's true. That's true. We are. So that was really good stuff. Very interesting, and I've actually incorporated some of her analysis in a little history I've written up on those particular ancestors to explain what they were about. So hopefully that helps you, Lonnie, and gives you something to think about, and others who might have interest in the same direction. David, thank you for your help, and we'll talk to you again next week, bud.
Take care.
All right, and that is our show for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. By the way, if you have a question for Ask Us Anything, just email us at askusanything@extremegenes.com. Thanks to our guest, Melanie McComb from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org, and to JoAnne Jessee, talking about swapping letters from World War I and the pandemic, a fascinating story from her, ordinary people with extraordinary finds. If you missed any of it, of course, catch the podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, Spotify, wherever fine podcasts appear. Talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.